Good evening.
Good evening.
The question is, to me, no effort is required to be aware of God's presence, but a real mental effort to become conscious of a few words. Now, the whole idea is this. It is not necessary to be aware of a few words. Words are only auxiliaries, and if one has the conscious awareness, even without words, they are already in heaven. Words sometimes are an interference. Thoughts very often are an interference. And a person who has the consciousness without words or thoughts is already in heaven. The only time that we need words and thoughts is in teaching. We do not need it in living. We do not need it in healing. As a matter of fact, the fewer words that we use in relationship to our patients, the better off we are. Those who have had experience with me know that my conversation is usually limited to, "I will help you." I very seldom go any further than that. Certainly I very rarely voice a truth unless there is something that specifically requires it. Wherever it is possible, I avoid voicing truth when I am called on for help and merely give the assurance that I will help. And the reason is this. Sometimes voicing a truth may antagonize one rather than help one. I know that it does me if I am ill or not feeling well or require help, and I ask for help, and I do occasionally. I have a dozen students that I very happily can turn to. I resent it very much if they start voicing truth to me, because I'm not interested in what they think about truth or what they know about truth or what they think I ought to know about truth. What I am seeking is a consciousness of truth. In other words, if you are in pain and I say to you, "Oh, now, you know it doesn't really pain," you know you'd get so mad you'd want to throw something at me. That is the way I feel. And so it is that there is an accident and some practitioner or metaphysician says, "Oh, there are no accidents in divine mind." I'm not particularly concerned about what is in divine mind. I'm more apt to be concerned with what is right here. And to make these statements, which are more or less cliches, well, I don't like it. That does not mean that we aren't called on occasionally to voice truth, in contradistinction to some appearance. But in the healing work, keep it to as little as possible and give as great an assurance as possible that you are standing by, and really stand by in consciousness, not with lip service. Not with words, with cliches, but with a real consciousness of the presence. Now we are going to come to what I mean a little later this evening. It says, "For me, no effort is required to be aware of God's presence." I would be aware of that in this sense, that to be very sure that you really mean it, that you are aware of God's presence. Because there are those who fool themselves by believing that they are aware of it, and they aren't at all. And how can you tell the difference? By your life experience, by the fruitage. If you really are experiencing a continuous harmony, if you are finding that there is a presence going before you to make the crooked places straight, if the problems are quickly and easily being solved, of course then, there is no question but that you do have a consciousness of God's presence. But if you think you are having the consciousness of God's presence and are continuously running into problems that do not solve themselves, or that do not quickly disappear. You may be fooling yourself. You may be having what we call an emotional jag. You see, that happens too often in the metaphysical world, more especially with people who are emotional. They are very apt to believe that they have the realization of God's presence because they have some kind of an emotional experience or a sensation of some kind, and that is not a good foundation. You can tell whether you have God's presence realized by the fruitage in your life, and if the problems of your life and of those who appeal to you for help are being met. You are on safe ground. You have the presence. But if not, then watch your step and go a step further and see if you can't really attain that presence which announces itself by fruitage. If you are consciously one with God, you will know it by the spiritual fruitage in your life. I must interrupt right here to remind you that when you are thinking, feeling about this presence, please never forget that unless you are at the same time unseeing human good as well as human evil and going through the center to the invisible, you may be getting into that state of mind, consciousness, of many of the religious leaders and mystics of the world who had this inner feeling of oneness with God, but never had a happy day or a healthy day or a prosperous day, and suffered all of the errors of the human world. In other words, it isn't alone the awareness of the presence of God that does all this. It is at the same time the awareness of the mesmeric sense of the human picture, whether it's good or bad, and not indulging it, enjoying it. Certainly, it's a sufferer to be so now, and we can, to a certain extent, enjoy the fruitage of it, as long as we are not congratulating ourselves that that is our spiritual demonstration, the human good. It isn't. The spiritual demonstration is what is the source of that human good. And if your mind is on the source, not on the effect, then you do well. And if you're not judging your well-being just by good physical appearances, but are consciously remembering that what you see, hear, taste, touch, and smell is not the reality, even when it's beautiful, always you must remember the invisible, which is the reality, and which is the source and cause of our outer good. Is it not possible that the consciousness which is now filled with human concepts could become so purified and full of light that what appears as a human body would fade out from human sight, and therefore not have to go through the process called death? Is it not because of the earthly consciousness that the body appears to die and dissolve into the earth? Yes, that is correct on both questions. It is said that Moses disappeared from sight without having been buried. It is said that Enoch disappeared from sight without having been buried. And certainly we have the story of Elijah, who to sense ascended on a cloud. Now it is possible that an individual may attain such a high state of spiritual consciousness that what appears as a human body actually disappears from sight as a human body. But only those who are very close to that degree of spiritual awareness will know it. As far as the rest of the world is concerned, they still will see it as a body being left for burial, because, remember, they will be seeing the universal concept. They will not be seeing that which is. they will be seeing their concept of that which is. In other words, if we had Jesus present here walking on the water, that does not mean that all of the people on the shore would see him walking on the water. As a matter of fact, you can be assured of this, that only a very few would. And those few would be those of spiritual consciousness, because, as it says here, earthly consciousness will see only an earthly concept. So even if you have made the transition without leaving a body behind, don't think for a minute that the world would believe it. The only ones who would believe it would be those of your own students who had been lifted to the degree where they could apprehend it. In other words, I told you of the experience where in Seattle we actually had the presence of the Christ in that room, tangibly experienced by over 200 people, but there were 450 people in the room, and the others did not know that anything had happened. We have twice had it happen in my classes, that I have disappeared from the platform and only a beam of light was left shining in the chair. And on both occasions, only about 4 people witnessed it. So that only those of spiritual vision can behold a spiritual demonstration. That is why the Master said to Peter, when Peter said, "Thou art the Christ," and the Master said, "Flesh and blood," that is your eyesight, your intelligence, your ears, hath not told you this. The Father within revealed it to you, meaning your spiritual consciousness, your Christhood. The Son of God, which had been raised up in you, realized the Christ in me. Otherwise, I would be just a Hebrew rabbi. The same way, when he took 3 of his disciples to the Transfiguration. Why only 3? Why not 12? And if 12, why not the 200? Because the experience of the Transfiguration could only be witnessed by those in that highest consciousness who have come to see that the past, the present, and the future are one. And therefore, all that hath been is now, all that ever will be is now, and therefore here in this nowness and here-ness I can behold the spiritual creation of the entire past, of the present, and of the future. All that they wondered at was why I had stopped talking in the middle, those who had not been aware of this Christ experience, and waited a few minutes and resumed. They knew nothing that had happened in that interval, and yet there were about 200 there who actually had the experience of witnessing the Christ. So it has been that on numerous occasions during our classwork, some very remarkable things have happened of a spiritual nature, but in each case not more than 6 or 8 or 9 students in the entire room were aware of it. The rest were not aware that anything had taken place. They saw nothing, heard nothing. To them it was just another class. But to the 6, 8, or 9 who were high enough in spirit, they actually witnessed something of what the world would call a miraculous nature. And so it is, I can assure you, that if the Christ should appear in this room during our work, only those would behold it who are high enough in consciousness at that moment to behold a spiritual vision. The rest would never know that anything had happened, and later would say, "Well, I know it didn't happen because I was there." That is exactly why the Hebrew race does not accept the resurrection, because it is said that only about 500 people actually witnessed the Master on earth after the crucifixion. Yet you must remember that there were multitudes with whom he had healed, multitudes whom he had fed, multitudes who listened to his sermon, But they were told, but we are told that only about 500 witnessed that resurrection. And so you can be assured that all the rest said that it really didn't happen because they were there. It must have been those of the 500 who formed the foundation of the Christian movement. That is, the movement that left the Hebrew church to follow the teachings of the Master after the crucifixion. So never for a moment believe that even if you were to make the transition and, like Elijah, mount on a cloud and disappear, do not believe for a minute that the world would say so in the newspapers the next day, because they would not be aware of it. They would see a body and they would bury a body. It wouldn't be a body. It would be the universal concept. But they couldn't rise higher than that concept. That is one of the reasons we have disagreements in spiritual work, because all, not being on the same level of consciousness, do not see the same thing and do not hear the same thing. You would be surprised if you could know some of the things that I have heard people read into my books or hear in my classes that never took place. But as far as they are concerned, they read it or heard it. But of course they didn't. They were just hearing their own concept, their own experience come back to them. Will you kindly make some reference as to what action an infinite way student should take with regard to a practitioner in a case of extreme urgency? I presume that means about contacting one. And there is no answer that I can make to that so far as local experience is concerned, because I do not know of anyone who is accepting the responsibility of acting as a practitioner at this present moment. Should you know of someone who is accepting the responsibility of practice, then the thing is to call on them for help. If the need isn't quickly met in the case of extreme urgency, then the only thing to do is to cable to Hawaii. That's why we have a cable address. And we do have those there who are capable of handling a cable should it come asking for immediate help. And also there are practitioners in other places whom you could contact. I presume it will not be long before somebody here or in Sydney or Adelaide will accept the responsibility of healing work. And of course there is. And in that case, of course, it will be made known very quickly. We do hope, however, that as a result of this classwork, that there will be those able and willing to take over the work. You see, the healing work is a matter of consciousness. It isn't so much a matter of how much truth you know. Knowing the truth isn't very difficult. But if knowing the truth is all there was to healing work, we would all be healers. But actually, healing work is dependent on a state of consciousness of truth. In other words, it is one thing to say error isn't a reality, which it isn't. It is quite a different thing to demonstrate it. And just declaring it will not demonstrate it. It takes an individual who has so dedicated themselves to their study that they have developed an actual consciousness of truth. That is why so much of the New Thought world is disappearing, because it was able to take courses for 6 weeks or 12 weeks and get a degree and then start out as a practitioner. Well, of course, there isn't anybody in all the world who can take one of these courses and be a practitioner just on the strength of a course. It just cannot be done. Nobody can develop a healing consciousness in that length of time, unless, of course, they had such a marvelous background beforehand that they were prepared for it. And the result has been, and I am speaking now primarily for the United States and for England, that thousands of students have been graduated as practitioners. Thousands of students have been given licenses as practitioners, and only dozens of them can heal. There are natural healers who do not have to take any course. There are those who have a spiritual consciousness that with or without a course can do wonderful healing work. It isn't the course that helps everyone to heal. It is the consciousness. A person may take a dozen courses. I have had people go through a dozen classes with me and can't heal. I have had students go through one class and do fine healing work. And I've witnessed many practitioners in other approaches to truth who, after one of our classes, has done better healing work than they ever dreamed of doing before. Because just some one point or other registered with them that had not been clear, and it clarified everything for them and made it possible for them to do good healing work. So it is not entirely a question of knowledge. I am convinced that the message of the Infinite Way and its writings is an absolutely correct spiritual teaching. And so if all that was necessary for healing work was a correct teaching, all you would have to do is to learn the Infinite Way books and set out to be a healer, but do not fool yourself on that. You have to go far beyond learning what is in the books. You have to develop an actual consciousness of the nature of error as nothingness. Because as long as you fight it, or battle it, or argue against it, or try to overcome it, you will not be a healer. But when you come to an actual inner awareness of God as the real life of being, the law of being, the real omnipresence, and therefore that all discord, all error is but the arm of flesh or nothingness, then that state of consciousness will do healing work. That is the reason that you will always find, probably in any one of the metaphysical movements, some who do very wonderful healing work, and then some who do manage to heal some of the lesser things, and then the vast majority who accomplish virtually nothing. Healing work is a matter of a state of consciousness. You can attain a healing consciousness by devotion to study and meditation and practice. You can develop it. And as I've said, there are some few who may attain it overnight with or without a teaching. But for the vast majority of people, it is something that has to be developed through an earnest study and an earnest practice and a continuous practice until this state of consciousness is developed. We will come to that state of consciousness also in tonight's lesson. Again, I interrupt. If a call is made upon me, regardless of its name, nature, or identity, and I can instantaneously so impersonalize it that I give not a thought to the person or the condition, but can see that I am being confronted merely with hypnotism, merely with a universal belief in two powers, and dismiss it, drop it, I will have a fine healing. But in proportion as the identity of the person enters my mind, or the nature of the claim, whether physical, mental, moral, or financial, in that degree it will be a protracted healing. That is why in the ordinary course of events you do not come across this, but in the active practice you do. That there are people who are suffering 5, 6, and 7 diseases all the time and are never well, and are never happy, and are never prosperous. It is as if some evil influence were following. It isn't. It's a state of consciousness that they've developed. But the point is that when such cases come to the practitioner, and more especially the younger practitioner, they're apt to have the feeling, oh, I'm not prepared for this, or this is too much for me, or I must call somebody else, and they have lost the case. And they have lost the opportunity for their own spiritual development, because it is still a picture of hypnotism. 32 cancers is just as unreal as one. Consumption in the last stage is just as much consumption as in the first stage, and they're both illusion. Therefore, to be able to unsee the identity of the one who's calling and to unsee the nature of the claim and see the whole thing as mesmeric suggestion, as a state of hypnotism or nothingness, enables you to resist not evil. Now I'm going to review for you some of the things necessary to the development of that healing state of consciousness. And this, of course, is the correct letter of truth, but it will only do the healing work for you when you attain the consciousness of it. The infinite way is built around a few words. The first of these words is as. That is one of the most important words in the entire infinite way language. The meaning is, God is manifest as individual being. There is not God and man. There is not God and you. There is only God manifesting its infinite spiritual nature as your being. All of this, you will remember, is invisible to human sense. Now, the minute you accept that, you can understand why I emphasize, Son, thou art ever with me, and all that I have is thine. Why? Because I and the Father are one and not two, and it is in that oneness that all that God is, I am. Since God is the Father and God is the Son. Do you remember that in Scripture? God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Ghost. God is the Father, God is the Son. We could explain that in this way, that God is the invisible you, and the Son is the visible you, yet they are one, the invisible and the visible. The invisible you is looking out from behind your eyes, looking over here at me. That is why I cannot see you, and you cannot see me. I am sitting behind these eyes looking out at you. You are sitting behind your eyes looking out at me, and I do not mean inside your skull. And that you is invisible. This which is visible is your form. And so the invisible you is really the law and substance of the form, the visible you. God is the invisible you, the I that I am. That which you call your individual identity, that is the Son. It is still God, even though it is the Son. God is the Father and God is the Son. And the way you account for it is with the word as. God, the invisible, appears as Son, the visible. So it is, when you understand God appearing as individual you and me, you will understand why all that God is, I am. All that the Father hath is mine. Son of God, heir of God, joint heir with Christ to all the heavenly riches, be cause of oneness. Do you follow that? Oneness. I of my own self can do nothing. But because of my oneness with the Father, all that God is, I am. That is why the Son of Man could forgive sins. That is why he could heal disease, because of his oneness with God. The Father within me, he doeth the works. So the Father is within me, and I am the without, but we are one. Wherever I am, the Father within me is. Therefore, wherever I am, the Father within me is about its business, doing healing works, saving works, supplying works, redemptive works. Once you perceive that God, the infinite, eternal, and immortal, appears individually as you, the Son, individual you and me, you will have the correct identity, the correct relationship between you and God. And you will understand why it is said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. Before Abraham was, I am with you. I will be with you unto the end of the world, because you cannot get away from yourself. You cannot get away from your inner self. You cannot get away from the God that formed you, because it is your identity. Do you see that? God appearing as you is the secret of the infinite way. That is the secret on which it was built. That is the secret on which it was formed. That was the secret that began to take me away from Christian Science. No reflection, no idea, no something less than God. No, no. God itself made manifest. God the Father appearing on earth as God the Son. Do you see that? It is oneness. Thou seest me, thou seest the Father that sent me, for I and the Father are one. Son, thou art ever with me, and all that I have is thine. Know ye not that ye are children of God, and if children, then heirs? And so you see, the first word that you must learn is as. God the Father appearing as God the Son. And always this is the invisible you we are talking about. Don't look at a human being, healthy, sick, dying, and call them the child of God. That is the mesmerism that hides the children of God. And therefore, we have the middle path. That which unsees good humanhood and unsees bad humanhood, and looks right down the center and sees invisible Christ identity. Of course, you have to learn that by living with it, by practicing it, by looking out at this world, at every man, woman, and child, and animal, and vegetable, and mineral that you meet, and realizing, this is God appearing as, this is not what it seems to be, this is God appearing as. You develop that consciousness so that eventually you never look at people and judge them by their humanhood. You never judge them as to whether they are male or female, or good or bad, or good-looking or bad-looking. You have an immediate contact with their spiritual consciousness. Sometimes those of us who have seen some measure of that get badly fooled, because we are not so accustomed, because we are so accustomed not to seeing their humanhood, that once in a while a human comes along and fools us. And we do have experiences like that, where we are taken advantage of, because we are not accustomed to the psychological way of looking at you and saying, this person is not to be trusted, or this one is. This one I wouldn't have confidence in. You get so accustomed to seeing their true spiritual identity that sometimes you do not realize that they haven't all quite accepted it for themselves. That is why some of you who are school teachers have a wonderful opportunity, by not only before leaving home in the morning, but actually when you're in the classroom, of looking out and realizing the hidden secret identity of everyone in that room. And then you will witness the fact that in the majority of cases they will respond to that, and in a great measure live right up to it. It'll surprise you that here and there will be a few on whom it will be like water on a duck's back. They are so immune to anything of a spiritual nature that they're untouched by it. But the majority will respond. If you want to do healing work, you must develop a consciousness that realizes that you are not dealing with human beings that you are trying to improve. You are dealing with God made manifest as individual being in spite of appearances to the contrary. In other words, you really train yourself to look at people in the eye, or through the eye, or back of the eye, and get in the habit of seeing them back there and realizing they're the Christ of God. They are the Christ of God. And as you do that, you ignore appearances, and in that way then, instead of trying to heal somebody or reform them or improve them, you are really bearing witness to their Christ identity, and that is what produces healing. The second word is. If it is true that God is made manifest as individual being, then harmony already is the truth about you. And so the great word in prayer and treatment is. You are never trying to heal somebody. You are never trying to reform them. You are never trying to enrich them. You are always living in the realization of is. Since God is your being, harmony is. Since all that the Father hath is yours, you are now in the fullness and completeness of God. Since God is the activity of your being, harmony is the law of your being. Do you see, by never dwelling in the past or future, you live with the word is. You are never trying to make 2 times 2 4. Even though you see 2 times 2 is 5 on paper, you are not trying to make it 4. You are realizing it is 4. Even though you behold a sick person or a drunken person or a dead person, you are never trying to change them. You are realizing is. Harmony is, life is, love is, abundance is, the fullness of the Godhead bodily is, I am. You are always living in a constant state of isness, even though, to human sense, you are aware of false appearances. I mean, a person may come to you and bear witness to being sick or poor or unemployed, but you are ignoring the appearance and declaring is. Because of as, is must be. Do you see that? If God is appearing as you, then harmony is the truth about you. And of course, I add to that even when you see what appears to you to be healthy human beings, you still have to declare the spiritual is, meaning the invisible is. Because the fact that they appear outwardly to be healthy is no indication that they are spiritually healthy, even should they be physically healthy, which isn't too likely. Therefore, your greatest treatment is the word is. Harmony is, God is, joy is, peace is, abundance is, omnipresence is, I am. Just think of that word omnipresence and what it means. Think of that word omnipresence. Now, in the presence of omnipresence, is there anything to be healed or anyone to be changed, reformed, overcome, or destroyed? Do you see that? Do you see that because of omnipresence, I am the only presence? I am must be the only omnipresence. Because omnipresence is the presence that I am. Is. And so you look at all appearances, but you do not permit yourself to be disturbed by the evil ones, nor rejoiced by the good ones, because you know that they have no more truth than the sky sitting on a mountain or streetcar tracks coming together. The eyes will bear witness to the fact, but your intelligence tells you that what appears is not so. And so it is that your eyes may bear witness to somebody's illness or poverty or sinfulness, but your spirit tells you no. This is God made manifest, this is God expressed, this is God revealed. Omnipresence means I am, and the I am is the only one. This is the very incarnation of God. Therefore, harmony is true regardless of what my eyes see or my ears hear. And that is why Jesus said, do you have eyes and do not see? Do you have ears and do not hear? Meaning, of course, your inner faculties. Now that is why healing work takes a developed consciousness. Because you have to develop the consciousness that is able to ignore the appearance and see through it. You have to have an inner vision that tells you This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased, even when sense testimony says it is a thief or a dying person. Nobody can successfully be a spiritual healer except an individual who has an inner assurance. This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. I do not care what the outer senses testify to. I do not care what the appearance may be. Something within you has to sing a song. And the song it sings is, this is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. I, in the midst of you, am mighty. And you see, these words will not do it. It has to be an inner conviction. And that is attained only through practice, through realization, and finally through the gift of God. That it comes to one in the inner self, this is the truth. When you can sit by a very sick person with no trace of fear, ignoring the appearance, and something inside of you is singing, this is my beloved Son, I in the midst of you am mighty, I will never leave you nor forsake you, then you are a spiritual healer, not otherwise. And that takes development. That takes practice until the day does come when this voice speaks to you from within. And that leads to the next. Remember, as and is. God appears as individual being. God is individual you and me. The qualities of God are your only qualities. God is the mind of man. You wouldn't think so if you went to visit a mental institute. But neither will you be able to heal anyone there until you have the conviction that God is the mind of individual man and the only mind. But once you have that conviction, God is the mind of individual man, then you will go in and heal those people. At least those you are called to. The next, of course, is the thing that I call nature of error, and is the one thing for which we receive more criticism than anything in the world, because there are people who call themselves absolute scientists or absolutists or absolute teachings, and they do not approve of our nature of error. Why? Well, they say since God is all there isn't any error. They are right. Since God is all, there isn't any error. But go and prove it. Demonstrate it. I have no fault to find with anybody who is so absolute that they can just say God is all and then see the sins and errors of the world disappear. But my own experience is this, that I am not quite so absolute, nor have I been able to find any students in my years who ever became so absolute. I have never seen one. And in all of the years that have gone by, I still have never seen one. And primarily because we all get hooked in some degree on personalization. We all either take offense at someone, or are shocked by someone, or are disappointed in someone, or momentarily we are romancing ourselves about someone. In other words, glorifying them or deifying them or believing that they are perfect. And in this way, we personalize. And to the degree in which we personalize, we fail. And therefore, I have never been able to be an absolutist and just say God is all, because I have to be very careful all of the time that I am not holding humans in my consciousness or feeling hurt at them or disappointed in them or overly joyed in them, and can hold myself to the vision that what I am really seeing and feeling and being aware of in them is their Christhood. And that takes impersonalizing. There is a reason for this. Let us face it openly. You and I are being faced with the appearance of sin, disease, and death every day in the week, aren't we? Certainly, that is all we are dealing with. That is why we are in this room right now in a class, because we are being faced with so many appearances of discord that we are seeking for some way to overcome them, to rise above them, to get free of them. As long as you are faced with an appearance of discord, it will be necessary for you to know the nature of that which is facing you in order that you can allay it or get rid of it or dispose of it. And so it is when someone calls you and says that they are sick, if you can rise to that absolute state and just say, oh, God is all, and they get healed, fine, stay there. But if you can't, then begin to realize this, that that which is presenting itself as error is not a condition nor a person, and there is no law to sustain the appearance. It exists only as an illusion, as a state of hypnotic suggestion, as an impersonal sense of two powers. And then when you've done that, you will find that you have lost your fear of it and you can drop it. Then you will usually find that a healing will take place. The very moment that you realize that error does not exist as a person or as a condition, but as an appearance, an illusory appearance, like the two tracks coming together in the distance, the minute that you can bring your inner intelligence to bear so that you can say there is no power in any condition or in any person except the power that is of God, the minute that you can say, this is not a condition, this is a fact, this is just a non-existent white poodle, this is just the snake in the rope, it is something that seems to be but isn't, or as the Hebrew said, this is only the arm of flesh nothingness. Then you are knowing the nature of error and you are disposing of it. You will not now be tempted to try to get rid of it or to treat it or to battle with it or to get a God to do something to it. You will be enabled the very moment that you can bring to your conscious realization, wait a minute, this error is not a person. There is not an erroneous a person on earth, because God is the very being of all persons. So there are no erroneous persons on earth. There is no erroneous mind. There is no erroneous law. There are no erroneous conditions. This is the mesmerism of human sense, and then drop it. Then you can get free of it. Then you can go back and say, God is the allness of being. God is the only law. God is the only life. Do you follow that? And you watch this, as you study the Infinite Way writings, you will find that most of the class books there is a chapter on the nature of error, and do not overlook these. These are always the most important chapters, not only in the Infinite Way writings, but I can say to you that the wonderful healing works that began with the metaphysical movements 75 or more years ago would never have been lost if they had not dropped this nature of error from most of the teachings. They have ignored it, and the result is that when they come to a healing case, they do not know what to do about it. They just don't know what to do about it, and they think that by affirming God's allness and declaring that God is going to do something to it, that something will happen, and it doesn't work. You will start healing right from the beginning if you will understand that everything and everybody that appears in your consciousness is a state of hypnotism, hypnotic suggestion, illusion, state of mesmerism, world mesmerism, belief in two powers, nothing to do with a person. It is just a world belief, a universal belief. And as you know that, you lose your fear of it. And when you lose your fear of it, that shows that God's allness is becoming real to you. But do not ever think for a minute that you believe in God's allness while you are fearing a person or condition, because you are not. You are just giving lip service to God's allness. You really and truly have the consciousness of God's allness when you have no fear of persons or conditions. And you can only do that when you can understand that persons, especially erroneous persons and conditions, do not exist as real errors, as evils, but as the arm of flesh or nothingness. Do you see that? So watch, study my writings carefully on the subject of the nature of error. More especially study the chapter New Horizon in the Infinite Way until you become absolutely convinced that you are not dealing with erroneous persons and conditions, that you are dealing with a suggestion of such, an appearance of such. The next step is that these truths that I've just given to you, and that I have given to you all through this class, must first be consciously known. That is the letter of truth. In other words, as you go out of this door tonight, you should consciously know that God has gone before you. When you get up in the morning, you should consciously know that this is God's day. God is the substance of today. God is the law unto today. God is the only presence today. God is the only experience today. As you have your meals, you should consciously express gratitude for God as the source of all supply. As you receive money or pay out money, you should consciously express gratitude that God is the substance of all supply. As you behold erroneous pictures, whether on the street or in the newspaper or on the radio, you must consciously realize these are not real conditions. These are products of mesmeric sense, the mesmerism of human consciousness, and they are not real, and they have no law to sustain them, and they have no cause. You must consciously declare these truths. As you behold people, you must consciously declare God appears as individual being. God constitutes individual man, woman, and child. God constitutes all that exists on heaven and earth. God is the reality of all. These truths must be consciously declared. It may take a whole year of consecrated knowing the truth, consciously knowing the truth, in order to build any kind of a consciousness of truth. As you develop this habit of consciously declaring these truths, consciously declaring the nature of error as unreality and so forth, you move into the second stage, which is the development of that listening ear, so that truth begins to impart itself to you. So it is, in the first year of your experience, probably the first years, you should be so busy consciously declaring truth that it fills your day. And as you do, you will be building a consciousness of receptivity, and eventually you will not be declaring truth at all. God will be declaring the truth to you. You won't have to declare truth anymore, except once in a while as a reminder. We call it priming the pump. But actually your major activity will be receptivity, so that when somebody asks for help, you will not declare so many truths at all. What you do is declare one or two truths and then open this ear, and the first thing you know, God will give you whatever truth is necessary for that healing. So it is that you will find that God will give you everything necessary for living your life. Paul was the one who best described it. He said, I live, yet not I, Christ liveth my life. Now you see, when you reach that state of consciousness, you no longer have to declare truth, because you are not living your life. This Christ or Spirit of God in you is doing it, and it keeps telling you what you should know, what you should declare, what you should realize, what you should say, what you should think. You aren't really doing very much thinking anymore. You are really living a life of receptivity, and it is always pouring into you from within. And so it is, when you are in the Spirit, when you have developed this listening ear, you will find that you will be receiving your directions from within, your protection from within, your everything from within. Our students learn that this is not an easy path to travel. And the reason is that in the first years, you have to be very diligent in knowing the truth, and this is not a lazy man's work. This is not spare time work. This is not just hoping that God is going to do something. This is the development of a state of consciousness. It is as exacting as if you wanted to be a concert pianist, and you just made up your mind that you've got to practice so many hours a day and be diligent about it and faithful and give your devotion to it. So it is with this. This is the development of a state of spiritual consciousness in which you pass from accepting what you see, hear, taste, touch, and smell as reality, and where you begin to perceive the nature of reality through this inner consciousness, this inner reality, where you really learn to see that a person isn't the one who is sitting in front of you. A person is that which is sitting behind their eyes. And so it is. Thank you.